Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of 5 Facts. I'm Tony Southcott and today we're talking about the 2007 horror hit The Mist. This is a film from Frank Darabont and it's an adaptation of a Stephen King novella, and it's one of my absolute favorite monster movies of all time. When it comes to Stephen King adaptations, I've always thought that Darabont kind of did it best. He did The Green Mile, he did Shawshank Redemption, and he's worked with a lot of these same actors, and he's built up a very good rapport with a lot of them. So whenever he actually takes the time to make one of these movies, it seems like he just gets that feeling down more than other directors. Anyway, there's going to be a lot of spoilers ahead, so be prepared for that. If you haven't seen this movie, I strongly recommend you go watch it first, then come back and check out this review. Fact number 1. Frank Darabont used music a lot less in this movie, and that's a very intentional thing. Sometimes music in films can add a lot of false tension. Like, you end up seeing it and they're trying to get your heart racing. They're trying to add more to the scene than is actually kind of warranted. Frank Darabont said that sometimes movie music feels false. I've always felt that silent can be scarier than loud, a whisper more frightening than a bang, and we wanted to create a balance. We kept music to a minimum to keep that verite documentary feel. The only notable music happens in this whenever they're actually driving through the mist at the end of the film, and that is sort of meant to be like a requiem mass. It's a haunting, like, just vocal thing where you can't really hear any lyrics going on. It's just to add a little bit of drama to that scene, and Darabont said that it was like a requiem mass for the human race. A requiem mass is a sort of sacred song usually reserved for funerals, especially group funerals. So I thought that that actually fit pretty well, and you also get to see some of the coolest looking monsters in that, like, even if it's just very briefly. So I liked having the music to accompany that for that section, but otherwise it kind of goes No Country for Old Men, where you don't have a lot of music interfering with what's happening on the screen. Fact number 2, Stephen King references are all over this film. The movie starts with David Drayton painting a movie poster for The Dark Tower. The title isn't explicitly there, but you can tell it is because it's Roland with the gun, with the Dark Tower behind him, with the rose. It's actually a painting from Drew Struzan, who would end up doing paintings for Star Wars, Blade Runner, all of this, and pretty much the ones on the wall for The Thing and Christine, which is another Stephen King movie, were all done by him, so this character is a little bit based off of that guy's career. The Dark Tower series, of course, would be adapted later with Idris Elba as the lead, so it's a little bit different looking gunslinger than most people expected. I still haven't seen that film yet, though. In another scene, a wire rack of books gets knocked over, and if you look closely, you'll notice that every single book on there is a Stephen King book. One of the ones that might be a little bit easier to miss is that when Miss Carmody says, "My life for you," that's actually something that's repeated a lot in The Stand and throughout the Dark Tower series, and pretty much anywhere where Randall Flagg pops up, or Walter or Dim, or the Man in Black, depending on who he is at that particular time. Like, there's a guy named the Trash Can Man that basically just chants it all the time. So it's cool to see that little reference make it in here. We also have David Drayton's son Bill in this, who he calls Big Bill several times, which is actually a reference to Bill Denborough in It. If you guys spotted any other references, please put them in the comments. Fact number 3. The same team that did Pan's Labyrinth did the effects for this movie. Ever since Frank Darabont wrote Nightmare on Elm Street 3, he wanted to make a monster movie, and he kind of started filing away the things that he wanted for whenever he would be a director. At the suggestion of Guillermo del Toro, he decided to grab the Cafe FX crew, and they would go on to make a lot of the tentacles, a lot of the practical effects, as well as doing the digital effects for this movie. When producing the monsters, Darabont spent a long time referencing other monsters in movies, books, and everything else because he wanted to have an original feel for these monsters. And I thought it turned out pretty awesome. You can tell that they're spider-like creatures, but the skull structure is so much different. And, like, they've got the penable jaw, but they also have, like, human-like teeth, and that's a very creepy thing to see on the face of a spider. So I really enjoyed that. The tentacles were very vicious-looking, too. You've got so many extra barbs and everything else, so it was just a cool set of monsters for this movie. I'm not sure how they've been doing that for the TV show. I'll be interested to check it out now that it's finally streaming. Darabont felt that these monsters weren't really described in great detail, so that gave him a fair amount of license to kind of make his own creatures from this. And since most of them were just inspired by different bugs, he was able to go pretty far with it. The movie itself was actually inspired whenever Stephen King was shopping in a grocery store and he saw the big pane windows and kept wondering what would happen if giant bugs just burst through the windows, and that's how we got the novella for this. Fact number 4. The game Half-Life was inspired from this novella. The hit game Half-Life from the Valve Corporation was directly inspired from The Mist. In the game, you have Dr. Gordon Freeman basically fighting off hordes of aliens after a calamity at a scientific facility opens a gate between dimensions and all of these creatures leak through. It's very much inspired by this. You don't really get The Mist, but you get all the monsters, so it's very similar. There is also a nod to the game in this movie in which the characters are running into a pharmacy and you see a couple of the characters carrying crowbars, which is Dr. Freeman's favored melee weapon in the Half-Life series. Fact number 5. The hardcore ending was very important to Frank Darabont. Darabont had wanted to adapt this movie for a full 20 years. He wanted to adapt it before he actually did Shawshank Redemption. So he had built up this kind of relationship with Stephen King, hoping that someday he would get to work on this one. He was offered $30 million originally to do this from Paramount, but ended up turning it down because they would only finance it if he changed the ending. Instead, he shopped it around for a producer that would allow him to make the movie he wanted. He ended up finding one of the now notorious Weinstein brothers who decided to go ahead with it with their Dimension Films label. They knew the ending was going to be horrible, and they decided to allow Frank Darabont to do it the way he wanted. In the novella, the fate of the characters is actually left a little bit more ambiguous. You do have the main characters saying that there's 3 bullets left and 4 people. In the show, there's 5, or in the movie, there's 5. And it's kind of an ambiguous ending. When the car runs out of gas, they just kind of disappear in the mist, and that's the end of the novella. We don't know if it's like a huge all over America thing. Like, we don't really have any idea of what's happening with that. Darabont wanted the ending to be a bit more clear, so he rewrote it, and whenever he showed it to Stephen King, King was all about it. Like, he thought that it was a great way of ending it and wished that he had thought of it himself. The Mist is a thriller that ends in one of the most heartbreaking scenes I've ever seen committed to film. I have a theory that this bummer ending actually dropped it down about 20% on most of the review sites. Like, you look at IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, it's in the 70s on both of those. And I think that this movie is basically at least a 9 out of 10. And maybe I'm just a little biased, maybe it's only 10%. But I can see why a lot of people have bad taste in their mouth after seeing this. It really makes me wonder about the value of a bad ending. The story is resolved, there's no doubt about that. But to have it go so unpredictably and have it go off the rails is really a gut punch that I kind of miss in movies. And I think it's important for a Hollywood film like this, looking at you, Marvel, to actually sometimes have things go bad for their characters. I think that this is important because it makes it so it's not as predictable. There are so many movies where you can predict exactly how it's going to end in the first 30 minutes of the movie. Hell, you can do it from the trailer for a lot of movies nowadays. So to have this one be so just gut-wrenching, I think was kind of a breath of fresh air for the genre. Like, this wasn't a Shyamalan-style twist. It was just an outright defeat. I also think that this ending kind of puts it above a lot of other monster movies where things just conveniently get resolved. We don't have, like, any sort of Deus Ex Machina happening here. I had the pleasure of watching this time with a friend who had never seen the movie before, and it's kind of like sitting there in a room before the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, and you know horrible things are about to happen, and they're completely clueless. So you get to see their reaction building as things are getting more tense, more tense, more tense. And whenever it actually happens, I just watched as they kind of went numb. They left my house shortly after in stunned silence, and it's been about 4 days since they've texted me. Might not have been their type of movie. Anyway, what did you all think of The Mist? Was it a good movie for you? Have you seen the black and white version that's on the Blu-ray? Did the ending ruin it for you, or do you still love it? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this, if you enjoy 5 Facts or just enjoy this channel, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/humanechoes. New members get pins, get postcards, get all sorts of other stuff. Also, early releases of a lot of our content. I'd always encourage you to support the makers that you love. $2 a month counts for more than a few thousand hits on YouTube most of the time, so keep that in mind. $2 a month is a great way to start. Thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see you in 2 weeks for another edition of 5 Facts.